we believe in democracy. I mean, the problem with the word socialism is that very often it's been equated with what happens in the Soviet Union, which is authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I believe very strongly in the right of dissent, and I think people with my ideas fight for those things very strongly.
Back to Hardball. When a self-identified socialist won election as mayor of Burlington, Vermont in 1981, he became a spectacle of political curiosity around the country. That man, of course, was Bernie Sanders, and as of now, he is posing a greater threat to Hillary Clinton than any other candidate in the Democratic field for president. But while every detail of Clinton's life and career has been put under the microscope and scrutinized, few know much more about Sanders beyond his fiery rhetoric, which has been lighting up crowds on the campaign trail.
The big money interests, Wall Street, corporate America, all of these guys have so much power that no president can defeat them unless there is an organized grassroots movement making them an offer they can't refuse.
Now we're learning a little bit more about the man who's captivating the Democratic Party's attention. In a profile in Politico magazine today called Bernie Sanders Has a Secret, our roundtable guest Michael Kruse digs into Sanders' past, revealing details that have been scarce despite his 40-year career. I'm joined now by the roundtable, MSNBC political analyst David Corn of Mother Jones, Sabrina Siddiqui of The Guardian, and Michael Kruse of Politico. So, Michael, you wrote this really great piece, really enjoyed reading it. Bernie Sanders has a secret. What is the secret you found out about?
Well, so when I flew to Burlington, Vermont, I got off the plane and I was interested in just learning more about Bernie Sanders in the 70s in general, but my reporting led me to his son's birth certificate, which showed that the mother of his son is not his first wife, which has always been assumed and which is what has been reported for 44 years. It's sort of amazing that over the course of 44 years, a public political figure like Bernie Sanders in Vermont could have that not come out. That is, I don't know if it's a secret, but that is
what I found.
This
is something, just to be clear, this is something also you confirmed with the campaign?
Well, I confirmed it with the campaign, but first I confirmed it with the birth certificate, so yes.
All right, just wanted to make sure on what the campaign was saying about it. But that's, well, David Corn, let me ask you about this, because it's interesting. What we're seeing with Bernie Sanders, it always strikes me when he's asked any question that's not about wealth concentration or the military, any specific explicit public policy question, he seems to bristle. It's a cheap question. It cheapens the process. You're sort of cheapening yourself as a journalist to ask about it. This resistance to any personal information about his life getting into the public domain, where does that come from? Is that a guy who's just has this sort of monkish devotion to public policy? Is it about being a New Englander, about being a Vermonter, where you don't talk about your personal life? What is it?
Steve, I'm surprised you're not talking about the fact that the rich are getting richer and have more power in this country than ever before. I mean, that's kind of what Bernie would say. And I think in some ways that's kind of almost refreshing as a politician. He runs because he has a core set of ideas and values and principles. And from his perspective, that's what should be part of the public discourse, not what happened 40 years ago. Now, as a journalist, as a historian, I think we need to know what the backgrounds of these people. And it's fair game. And Michael's piece is fair game. At Mother Jones, we've been doing a lot of stories about what Bernie was writing about and thinking about in the 70s. And his story is great. He became a very kind of marginal radical who then went on to become a local organizer who won elections and became a senator, in some ways the most successful politician in America. But I do think in Vermont, of all, probably maybe one of the few states in the country, is where Bernie could take this hands-off my personal background stance. You know, there's a Yankee notion of privacy, and in the past, when opponents have tried to raise these issues about him, he says, get out of here, and the public supports him. So the public ultimately has the right here to say, we don't really care, we don't want to know, and if people ask questions and Bernie makes an issue about that, we're on his side.
Well, while he's been averse to discussing his personal life, Sanders does, of course, have a lot to say when it comes to his political life, and he has been stubbornly, relentlessly on message, as David said there, for decades. Here's what he had to say about the polarization of wealth in this country back in 1981.
You have a handful of people who control our economy. You have maybe 2% of the population that owns 1/3 of the entire wealth of America, 80% of the stocks, 90% of the bonds. And these people have incredible power.
And here's Bernie Sanders discussing the very same subject in May.
When the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, maybe it's time for real political shakeup in this country and go beyond establishment politics.
You know, Sabrina, it's so interesting. I remember covering Ron Paul back in 2008 and 2012. I would listen to his speeches and I'd say, I'm not hearing a campaign speech here for the year 2012. I'm hearing a lecture that Ron Paul has been delivering since 1974 or something like that. It felt like the message hadn't changed, but the circumstances of the country had changed in a way where there was an audience for Ron Paul that maybe never would have been there before in his career. And Bernie Sanders is sort of experiencing a similar moment here.
Yes, he is, and I think it's rare to find politicians who have maintained that level of consistency over that many decades. And I think what was interesting about Michael's piece is you got more of a glimpse into his personal life, his background, and how that really shaped his political views. One of the pieces that I found interesting, for example, was learning that he was on unemployment benefits for a couple of months, and later, after that, he argued and advocated against having time limits on unemployment benefits. So I think that's actually the nature of someone's personal life that voters are interested in. How does your personal life shape your political views and the issues that you're advocating for, as opposed to when there's a fixation on what could be scandalous? And that's part of why I think Bernie has been reluctant this entire time to talk much about his family, because he simply doesn't believe that his ex-wife or his son is relevant to the political discourse and his career as a politician.
Yeah, you know, Michael, it's interesting. I think we all just sort of assume politicians, they have money, they're wealthy, they're comfortable. We just kind of assume that. That's one thing that struck me in your piece as well. He's 40 years old. It's 1981. He gets elected mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont. I think it pays, what, $32,000, $33,000 a year. And it's like Bernie Sanders hit the jackpot. This is the most money he's ever made in his life.
Way more in the first steady paycheck he had had as an adult. I mean, throughout the 70s, he was really living hand to mouth, renting an apartment in Burlington that was sparsely furnished, the electricity being turned off because he couldn't pay his bills from time to time. You know, this is all part of the entire person. It's not an either-or proposition to me. Yes, his issues are important. What he says is important. What he's done is important. But where he's been and who he's been, that's important too, especially if you're running for president.